All right, I think we're live. Adam, welcome to the Nik Fuller Show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be with you, Nick.
Super stoked. Today we're going to talk about all things recruiting. What does that mean? What does that look like? And you'll give me a quick MBA on how to better negotiate, my next salary.
Hopefully, maybe some useful tips. We'll see though.
Yeah, love it. But before we get into it, we have to tell the people to subscribe. Because when you subscribe, the channel grows, we get likes, that encourages more people to watch, they're going to learn more. And this is a can't miss episode, I guarantee it. Right, Adam?
Definitely click the subscribe button and stay tuned for upcoming episodes.
Love it. All right, cool. Now we're all YouTubers, and that's our new career. That'll be the next episode.
There we go.
Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you being on the show. We worked together for a few years, and I've always just kind of wanted to know more about your background and what does really recruiting mean, especially in the tech space where we come from. So, Adam, you want to give a quick intro, what you do, and then let's get into your career and what your career has looked like so far.
Yeah, so now I'm mainly focused on SaaS sales recruiting, but I started my recruiting career with a company called Tech Systems in Birmingham, Alabama. So their Tech Systems is an external recruiting agency, recruiting partner, right? So let's say a company has a massive, hiring push. They need 30 new people on the help desk. Well, they may go to a Tech Systems because that office for Tech Systems or that market could have 30 recruiters, where that company may only have a team of 5, and they still need other positions like R&D, professional services, all of the kind of intertwined pieces within an enterprise level SaaS org. So that's my start with recruiting, and we can get into this a little bit later, but initially thought I was going to use recruiting as a avenue to get into sales, and then had the inevitable kind of pivot with that. Like all decisions or kind of plans you lay out when you're 24, 25, those change by the time you're 30, right? But moved on from there and started with OneTrust, which is where we work together, and focused on sales recruiting there, and worked with both in people management and as an individual contributor to build out that sales org. So there, everything from sales managers, VPs, BDRs, individual contributors, and just got to see, kind of a 360 view of how a SaaS sales org is built out. And I think we did really well there. We were the #1 fastest growing company in America, top of the list for all of the analyst reports. And I think that's kind of a testament to the individuals that we were able to hire and bring on board there.
Absolutely. You probably were the recruiting team that hired the most people in Atlanta for like a few years in a row. I can't think of a company that grew any faster, and a recruiting team that probably had more pressure to grow than the one that you were leading.
Yeah, there could have been some, but I would say we were definitely up there with, the highest of the high volume for sure.
I love that. And that's going through that kind of experience. I know for me personally, going through that, it accelerates your career a lot. You make a lot of mistakes, but you make them fast and you learn from them. And you get a few gray hairs as part of that experience. Can you talk a little bit about, what that process was like, maybe some of the challenges of growing a recruiting team and scaling so fast?
Yeah, well, I think in a place like OneTrust or any hyper growth company, I think the challenge, personally, and when you're leading a team, is how do you kind of get the mindset of, yourself, the people you're leading, to see all of these kind of big challenges in front of you as, opportunities towards those ends that you just named, like career advancement, being able to kind of expedite that quicker than, historically people typically see, increasing their value personally and, professionally for wherever they go next, and using, all of these kind of big challenges that we have as vehicles to really, build those skills that are going to help them be more successful, be more valuable in the next role. And I think that was something that, kind of clicked for me early on at OneTrust. But I think we did a good job of kind of having that growth mindset as a recruiting team for sure.
Yeah, I love that. So Adam, let's go back to the beginning. You mentioned you got into recruiting as a way to break into sales. And that's one thing I was just talking to my brother about the other day. Recruiting and sales seem very similar to me in nature. You're convincing people to do something and in exchange for their time, in exchange for money, right? And I'd love to know more about kind of the role itself. How is a typical recruiter compensated? Is it salary? Is there a commission tied to it? And do you see a lot of recruiters moving into sales? And what's kept you in the recruiting seat?
So I'll kind of work backwards. And what's kept me in the recruiting seat is that most recruiters are just paid salary. So more of a known or a constant in terms of kind of compensation. And certainly, top earners in every industry are always salespeople, right? So like you're never going to have a recruiter out earning, the number one rep at Dell or anything like that, right? But also a little bit different level of pressure in terms of, kind of how you're going about your day-to-day numbers and things of that nature. But, it's really two-sided solution selling, right? Kind of finding the pain points for someone. So Nik, what are your pain points? Are you looking for upward mobility? Is that something you're not seeing at your current company? Do you not have the opportunity to really take on new areas that are going to build new skills and help you move in the direction that you want to move towards? And really, it's not so much, it's kind of a difficult thing to communicate, but you're just kind of solving for pain points on both sides, right? Because the flip side of that, and like you've seen, from a management standpoint, there's a particular set of skills that are kind of non-negotiable when you're hiring someone, but then there's also those kind of soft skills or those intangible skills where those could differ as the team matures. Right. So, person you need to hire, those skills that you need to hire today, that could look different this time next year.
Okay, quick break. We had some technical difficulties, so I'm putting in a quick commercial for you to sign up for my newsletter, nikfuller.com/newsletter, NIK, no C in this game. So my newsletter goes out monthly. I call it my friend's newsletter. I send out exclusive life hacks, business research, interesting links. Hundreds of people subscribe to it. A lot of my consulting, sales, lawyer, CEO friends tell me it's their favorite email of the month. So sign up monthly, unsubscribe if you don't like it, but just give it a peek. nikfuller.com/newsletter. I'll see you there.
We were talking about, I think from a management standpoint, the soft skills those vary from, any point in time to any other point in time, because your team's going to mature. There's going to be folks that build a competency in particular skills that, hey, maybe I don't need to hire for, X, Y, and Z now because Nik can do that. He started to build that skill set. So it's really kind of two-sided solution selling and finding, what are the pain points that's causing this person to leave, their current job or start to look from their current job. And do those line up with what we have to offer? If not, great, let's not mislead anyone. But, that's really kind of the same thing. And obviously nuances a lot different than sales if you really want to get granular. But from a 30,000 foot view, I think it's easily summarized as kind of two-way solution selling.
Yeah, I like it. Fitting the need for the organization, but also the need for that individual and looking where those two fit. And so, Adam, I think in your career, you've recruited across a lot of different types of roles. Can you talk about what some of those look like and, maybe how working with those type of individuals vary?
Yeah. So when I started with tech systems, I was doing actual, IT recruiting. So there were, developers. For a time, I worked on like systems admins, network engineers, security engineers, DevOps, to help desk, app support, and that kind of evolved as I got more tenured and more experienced with tech systems. But I think that really served me well as I moved over to OneTrust, because you were always learning something new at tech systems, because hey, you're starting with this kind of end user support skill set you're going to be focused on. Then it gets a little bit more complicated with network admins, systems admins, network engineers, systems engineers, and then recruiting developers, which can be as complicated as it can get. So there, coincidentally, or maybe more ironically, when I was actually interviewing with OneTrust, my recruiter, I had been interviewing for an R&D recruiting position, and the day before my on-site interview, they emailed me and said, hey, it's going to be a sales recruiting position now. Are you open to that? And at the time, I was moving to Atlanta to be in the same city as my fiance, or my girlfriend at the time, now wife.
Congrats.
So that worked out.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thought to myself, like, yeah, why not? Let's see how it goes. And, if I just suck at it, well, I guess I'll reassess and, see what to do next. But turned out to be a really good decision and worked out well and gave me a lot of exposure to new areas.
So what's the difference between recruiting a developer versus recruiting a salesperson?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because it's been so long, and I know developer recruiting has really heated up since I was doing it, almost 4 years ago now. But one of the biggest things that, I think from a sales recruiting specific standpoint, that is always kind of difficult or maybe a little bit different, is how much ambiguity there is with it, right? Because there's, these kind of tangible skills or tangible, pieces of experience you can look for outside of sales. Hey, do you have experience with JavaScript? Do you have experience with, whatever? Whereas sales, you kind of have these 3 or 4 questions that you can ask. Did you hit your quota last year? What was your quota? What was the average deal size? How long was the sales cycle? Who were the decision makers you were selling to? Who was involved in the sales cycle? Did you have SEs? Were you doing your own demos? And from there, that's maybe 7, 8 questions that really have those kind of tangible answers that you can look for. A lot of the other stuff you just kind of have to go off of feel, and then very much akin to sales, really listening intently and processing what you're hearing in real time to be able to just dig a little bit deeper, ask those 2nd and 3rd level follow-up questions to really get as granular of an understanding as possible as to, what role did this person play in moving that deal along? Right. And, how did they hit the numbers that were laid out in front of them?
Yeah. Not to take away from other roles, but, for a developer, there's a lot of maybe online tests you could take to see if they can, compile code and make it work. For a sales rep, I don't know, maybe outside of like, sell me this pen, if there's other tests really besides, that gut feel, and if they've done it before, and kind of putting those two together to see if they'll be a good fit, and maybe references, but I don't know if there's any other ways to do it.
So what you'll see a lot of times is going to be, not necessarily a test, but more of a presentation. And you may have had to do something like that when you started with OneTrust. We did a lot with our sales reps, probably more kind of 2019, 2020. Yeah. Hey, this is a 15-minute discovery call. It's an initial discovery meeting with a decision maker at a company of your choosing. In that scenario, it was, you're acting as a OneTrust sales rep. Go, like, show me how you would navigate this discovery meeting. And I think one of the important things there, because those prompts, as they're kind of referred to, are going to be, they're going to look different from company to company. But for a salesperson going through that process, don't overthink it. But also, one of the things that I really saw that kind of threw off even more senior level sales reps at times was kind of putting too much artistic license on the prompt. So, if the prompt says, Nick, you've landed an initial discovery meeting with company of your choosing, your OneTrust sales rep, go. Follow that pathway, right? Don't kind of change it up and be like, okay, so I'm Nick, I'm a OneTrust sales rep, or, I'm a sales rep at company A, and this customer has now been with us for a year. We're coming up on a renewal. Now let's kind of get this meeting underway. It's two completely different meetings, right?
Yep.
And some companies are really just going to want to focus in on, okay, did you kind of pay attention to what we were wanting to do versus, that may have been a great meeting to talk about renewals and maybe upsell or something along those lines, but that's not the meeting we were trying to have.
Right. Trying to get cute with it and show their other skills, maybe stand out, but in the end, that's impacting because they're not following the rules of the road here for the interview.
Yeah, and in all likelihood, the people who can nail that that renewal meeting, they would have done just as well on the discovery meeting, but they'll get dinged for the discovery meeting or for the renewal meeting because it was supposed to be discovery. And so it's just kind of paying attention to what's laid out in front of you and kind of understanding, okay, there's some intention behind this.
Definitely. What are some other pitfalls you've seen as folks are interviewing for sales roles?
I think one of the big things is, and this is probably useful for interviews in general. I know, I just went through interview processes and it was something that was focused in on my interviews and I was on the candidate side, but specific metrics, right? And a lot of people, we hear all about STAR questions: situation, task, action, result. And, that's a way of kind of structuring those open-ended, what we used to call like HR personality-based questions. But what those really are just, short stories about yourself in that specific scenario that generally end in a positive light, right?
Yep.
You're not going to tell anyone, hey, I fell on my face and just laid there, or something that doesn't really reflect positively. You might want to just kind of start from scratch with the interview approach there. But just gives you kind of that simple framework. And I think as metric specific as you can get, particularly for sales, right? Very metric driven business or metric driven profession, as detailed and granular as you can get in those answers and kind of show, hey, here's where this was current state when I got it. Here's what I did to positively impact this thing. And here was the outcome. If you can get in each one of those instances, the better, particularly as you're interviewing for, more higher level kind of sales roles, because then you're probably interviewing with VPs, directors, and that's speaking, the exact same language to those folks.
Yeah, I like it. As they say on Shark Tank, you got to know your numbers.
Yeah.
Especially in sales, where did the account start? How much did you grow it? What are the percents there? And so you can build that book of business and manage it and be trusted with that.
Yep, exactly.
Love that. Awesome, man. So I think from here, I'd love to get into some tips and tricks a little further when it comes to like negotiating, right? So this is somewhere an area where people talk about it a lot. Don't give a number, ask for more time. There's millions of YouTube videos on this, but would love to hear from you, as a lot of folks are on the job market now, they're looking for their next role. What are those best practices or leading practices, however you have it, of negotiating, and what do people get right? What do they get wrong? What are the misconceptions there?
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions is, depending on the size of the company, right? Like not meant to be universally applicable, right? Like each person's in a different scenario when they're interviewing. They have different things that are, important to them as they're going through the job hunt. You do have to weigh those things against, okay, what's the risk as I go into this negotiation if I'm really trying to, go higher than they're saying they can go, or whatever it may be that you're trying to negotiate towards. But one of the biggest misconceptions, like the employment agreement cannot be changed for one person.
Okay.
Right? Like I just have to throw it out there for the good of LinkedIn. The employment agreement, if the company is probably, let's say, larger than probably 100 people, because even if it's under 100 people, they probably had an external counsel draw up that contract, in which case it's still not going to be able to just go back and be changed for one person. So that's a huge one. If there's
And
something,
what's typically in that employee agreement that people want to change?
I mean, it depends. And that's where, you know, from a recruiting standpoint, you run into folks where certain things are more important to them than others. And like, you know, PTO, generally a company can't negotiate PTO because it has to be standardized for all of their employees, or else then you run into some much bigger HR issues that you could be liable for. So like anything to do with like benefits, PTO, all of that stuff has to be standardized for the employees that are working within that market or that region. And you know, if you don't do that, then you're running afoul of HR law in many, many states.
Love it.
Now,
What else?
I think in terms of things that can be negotiated, honestly, one of the things that I've always seen work well is like just be transparent with the recruiter. And generally, at least the recruiters I've worked with, granted, tons of recruiters out there, you know, they'll be as transparent as possible back. And, you know, I couldn't go into calls in my past roles and just be like, hey, this is the highest end of the range we have. Just because, you know, you can't do that, right? A lot of what you're going to be able to negotiate towards is going to depend on how you as an individual present yourself in the interview and how well or how able you are to effectively communicate the value you're going to bring to that team. So, you know, things like salary, that's always going to be negotiable. Now, what you have to be careful about is starting to price yourself out of jobs. Right. So
how do you know, how should someone find out what the range is? Because some companies, they won't tell you a range. So what are maybe some areas they can look or that you recommend?
So, you know, Glassdoor, obviously that's a notorious website. That's, you know, recruiters, we kind of cringe when we hear Glassdoor because your first assumption is like, all right, I hope I'm not getting something negative on there. But Glassdoor has tons of good information that you can just start to compile and look at, you know, this is the role I'm interviewing for based off my level, my tenure, my experience. You know, those numbers can kind of give you a roundabout ballpark that you can almost kind of take back and gut check when you're talking with the recruiter. Now, it does take more than you just kind of throwing a number up on the whiteboard to be able to confidently negotiate that stuff. It's manual data collection. But, you know, how much is your time worth, right? So, you know, something that I did when I go through job interviews, I'm going to go look at as many of the interviews, as many of the salaries with that company as I can on Glassdoor and just take notes. What are the interview questions? What are the salaries for these positions? And then that at least kind of gives you a rough estimate of where you're looking at. And, you know, recruiter, again, may not be able to say, this is the range that I have, but you can go back and say, can you do this number based off the data that you've gathered? And there's no other way to say that than yes or no.
Right. I love it. And so being in tech, you have salary as part of your comp. The other part is equity. And so everything's negotiable. Where do you see more flexibility?
I generally see salary is always going to be the first one people kind of lean towards for negotiation. Because that's just, you know, we're kind of hardwired for that to be like the default number that we go to. Like, what am I making per year? I want that to be as high as possible. In a lot of pre-IPO companies, you know, you'll feel for how matured things are internally as you're going through the interview process. Again, kind of using that 100-person company as an example, things are going to be super negotiable there because it's not going to be a really defined, standardized program. And, you know, those first 100 hires, they all probably kind of negotiated their own unique equity packages. Probably a little bit more difficult when companies are public and we're talking more in terms of like RSUs than, you know, equity grants. But typically, you know, if you're going into a pre-IPO startup, there's going to be wiggle room on that equity side for sure.
Awesome. All right.
And actually, not to jump in there, Nick, but I
No,
think
please.
one thing, particularly for folks, a little earlier on in their careers, I think one of the important things to kind of keep in mind there is like, don't look early in your career. If you find it, like, great, but just because something doesn't translate into like, oh, I'm not going to become a multimillionaire from this one job that I worked for 3 years. Like, don't think about that. Think about, if you're working towards having $1 million in the bank by the time you're 40, 45, like, okay, I can get 150,000 in equity from this company. And once it IPOs, maybe it goes to 200, maybe it stays at 150, who knows? But that's a solid building block early in your career to have, moving towards that, million number, whatever it is that you've kind of set out for yourself. But I think that's something a lot of folks get caught up with is pre-IPO equity. They're looking 2, 3, 4, 5 years, like, all right, then I'm kicking my feet up, grabbing my Corona, going to the beach, whatever. But definitely just think about it in terms of those building blocks, and that stuff starts to add up a lot faster than you think it will when you're kind of at the starting block of your career.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think there's probably a misconception too around at what stage you join the company, how much equity you'll really get. Early
Yes.
on, pre-Series A, you're taking a much bigger risk and supporting, a vision and trying to make it a reality. But you join a Series D company, chances are you're not going to get the $1 million equity package because the hard work's been done, and this is a little taste off the top.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And that kind of stuff's right. Like, for the exact reason you mentioned, those first 100 people, they probably didn't have PTO, right? They may have had like 5 days of PTO. They probably didn't have great healthcare. They didn't have a 401k. So they did take a greater risk that kind of equally coincides with, that greater payoff at the end there, whatever kind of exit that company is working towards.
Yeah, love that. So Adam, as we start to wrap up here, what is, advice for what makes a good recruiter, and what's some advice for those looking to break into recruiting?
I think the advice for people looking to break into recruiting, go the external agency route. That's a fantastic way to get, a diversity of experience working with, people, different backgrounds, different personas, and how to communicate effectively with each one of those. And it's a grind, right? Like, it's the equivalent of kind of starting off in the BDR world for a sales rep. Like, you're on the phones all day. You have to get used to talking to people, delivering bad news, which is just part of being a recruiter. And, for me, I think that really helped tremendously, as I moved a little bit further along in my career. In that agency environment, I had a manager that had hit the equivalent of President's Club 21 years in a row. And so, like, very high expectations, very, urgent sense of business, effective communication. And, if you look at that stuff as, oh, this is kind of a grind, I don't really enjoy it, this isn't what I want to be doing long term, like, yeah, it's probably going to wear you down. But if you kind of look at it as, hey, you're kind of building that toolkit to be effective at the next role, it'll pay dividends. So I think anyone wanting to kind of get into recruiting, go the agency or external agency route, and find a good manager who has a track record of success, and they'll build that skill set that's going to make you effective or successful, whatever that next role is.
I love that analogy. It's the same as an SDR, a BDR in sales. It's also very similar to what I'm doing now, consulting. Growing up in a big firm like Accenture, you get to see a lot of different projects. You get beat up, you take your licks, but you learn very quickly in those type of roles, and that gives you a great foundation to go do something else because you've seen a lot. And what I love about recruit or consulting too is what industries you like and what you don't like, and what kind of companies you like and you don't like. Probably the same for recruiting is, hey, I've talked to, I worked for this company and they're not as great as they look, or I've heard a lot from candidates, and this isn't really the best place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to circle back to the first question there of, what makes an effective recruiter, I think it's going to vary, kind of person by person, right? And I think what makes someone else good at recruiting might not necessarily work for me, but some of those same things probably do work for me. But I think one of the most effective things you can do as a recruiter, whether you're pretty tenured, if you're just starting out, it's like raise your hand for anything and everything, because the more different skill sets you work on, the more you raise your hand to go build out a new team. Yeah, I used to refer to it as money in the bank to my team that I manage, because you're just making yourself more valuable. You're the only one who's hired for that team. Okay, who do you think they're coming to the next time they need someone hired? Well, you. So you're the expert in their eyes now, which, that's what, from a sales perspective, you're always wanting to kind of get that, trusted partner status, right? So I think just raise your hand for anything and everything. And, when there's kind of those big challenges to take on, those big hiring sprints, as we've referred to them, be the person that takes it on and look at that as an opportunity to just make yourself more valuable.
I love that, man. I love this conversation here. It's such an interesting role that I feel like it's overlooked a lot. It's not as sexy as, being an engineer or being a salesperson, but companies don't get built without recruiting. No one joins.
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten to work with, a CRO, sales VPs, and get to see, for a salesperson, what may take an entire career for them to get to be a part of building out a sales org like that. I got, just 3 years of, putting my best foot forward, got to see all of that stuff with, kind of a first row seat. So I think it's definitely a good career path for folks that, are competitive. They enjoy, problem solving. They kind of have that natural motor or just high energy. But maybe like sales just isn't the route that they want to go, or maybe professional services, whatever it is. That's one of the kind of unique things about recruiting, is there's no like standardized template of, hey, this is what's going to make someone good. Like everyone's unique strengths are what they can kind of lean into to make themselves an excellent recruiter.
Yeah. And I'll say before we wrap up here, one of the things I try to implore on new folks in any role is you personally have to be a good recruiter. Because if you're going to build a team around you, Adam can get them in the door, can negotiate all the salary, but ultimately they're going to work for you. And you need to be able to sell yourself, sell your team, sell them on the vision to join your team and work for you. I remember many late nights where I'd scroll LinkedIn and send them to our friend Christian and say, hey, reach out to this person, and I'll close them if you get them on the phone. But it's a personal strength that people should work towards as well, because you don't know where you'll go. You might build a team. You might want to start a company one day. That's one of my goals. And I want to be able to recruit all of my friends to come work for me and the vision for it. And so flexing that skill, I think, is an important but often overlooked skill to have.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even, what you're starting to kind of get into there also bleeds into retention, which like that's a whole nother podcast episode that people much more qualified than myself are, probably better suited to speak to. But yeah, I mean, this day and age, you kind of always have to be recruiting like that.
Always be recruiting. That's the motto.
Yeah, ABR. Everyone knows it.
Yeah. Awesome, Adam. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. If people want to find you, if they want to be recruited by you, where can they reach out?
On LinkedIn. Check LinkedIn every day. Just muscle memory at this point in recruiting. If you want to have just network connection, happy to have a conversation, provide any advice I can. I'll be starting a new role later this month, so hopefully some of the folks who see this will end up getting recruited by me. But more importantly, go click the subscribe button for the Nik Fuller podcast. All right.
There he is. Love it. Awesome. Well, you just earned another episode with that. So I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
that's the gold star, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. If you guys made it this far in the podcast, give Adam a like, a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, find him on LinkedIn. If you have questions, leave them in the chat. I'll make sure he answers those. And this will get posted on LinkedIn and YouTube and everywhere in the next week or so. And with that, thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next show.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Nik.
Thanks, man.